Let's set the existence of God issue aside for a later volume and just stipulate that in some way, self-replicating organisms came into existence on this planet and immediately began trying to get rid of each other, either by spamming their environments with rough copies of themselves, or by more direct means which hardly need to be belabored. Most of them failed, and their genetic legacy was erased from the universe forever. But a few found some way to survive and to propagate. After about 3 billion years of this sometimes zany, frequently tedious fugue of carnality and carnage, Godfrey Waterhouse IV was born in Murdo, South Dakota, to Blanche, the wife of a Congregational preacher named Bunyan Waterhouse. Like every other creature on the face of the earth, Godfrey was, by birthright, a stupendous badass, albeit in the somewhat narrow technical sense that he could trace his ancestry back up a long line of slightly less highly evolved stupendous badasses to that first self-replicating gizmo which, given the number and variety of its descendants, might justifiably be described as the most stupendous badass of all time. Everyone and everything that wasn't a stupendous badass was dead. As nightmarishly lethal, mimetically programmed death machines went, these were the nicest you could ever hope to meet. In the tradition of his namesake, the Puritan writer John Bunyan, who spent much of his life in jail or trying to avoid it, the Reverend Waterhouse did not preach in any one place for long. The church moved him from one small town in the Dakotas to another every year or two. It is possible that Godfrey found the lifestyle more than a little alienating, for sometime during the course of his studies at Fargo Congregational College, he bolted from the fold and, to the enduring agony of his parents, fell into worldly pursuits and ended up somehow getting a Ph.D. in classics from a small private university in Ohio. Academics, being no less nomadic than congregational preachers, he took work where he could find it. He became a professor of Greek and Latin at Bulger Christian College, enrollment 322, in West Point, Virginia, where the Mattaponi and Pamunkey rivers came together to form the estuarial James, and the loathsome fumes of the big paper mill permeated every drawer, every closet, even the interior pages of books. Godfrey's young bride, née Alice Pritchard, who had grown up following her itinerant preacher father across the vastnesses of eastern Montana, where air smelt of snow and sage, threw up for 3 months. 6 months later, she gave birth to Lawrence Pritchard Waterhouse. The boy had a peculiar relationship with sound. When a fire engine passed, he was not troubled by the siren's howl or the bell's clang. But when a hornet got into the house and swung across the ceiling in a broad Lisa Jus, droning almost inaudibly, he cried in pain at the noise. And if he saw or smelled something that scared him, he would clap his hands over his ears. One noise that troubled him not at all was the pipe organ in the chapel at Bulger Christian College. The chapel itself was nothing worth mentioning, but the organ had been endowed by the paper mill family and would have sufficed for a church 4 times the size. It nicely complemented the organist, a retired high school math teacher, who felt that certain attributes of the Lord, violence and capriciousness in the Old Testament, majesty and triumph in the New, could be directly conveyed into the souls of the impued sinners through a kind of frontal sonic impregnation. That he ran the risk of blowing out the stained-glass windows was of no consequence, since no one liked them anyway, and the paper mill fumes were gnawing at the interstitial lead. But after one little old lady too many staggered down the aisle after a service and made a barbed comment to the minister about the exceedingly dramatic music, the organist was replaced. Nevertheless, he continued to give lessons on the instrument. Students were not allowed to touch the organ until they were proficient at the piano, and when this was explained to Lawrence Pritchard Waterhouse, he taught himself, in 3 weeks, how to play a Bach fugue, and signed up for organ lessons. Since he was only 5 years old at the time, he was unable to reach both the manuals and the pedals, and had to play standing, or rather strolling, from pedal to pedal. When Lawrence was 12, the organ broke down. That paper mill family had not left any endowment for maintenance, so the math teacher decided to have a crack at it. He was in poor health and required a nimble assistant, Lawrence, who helped him open up the hood of the thing. For the first time in all those years, the boy saw what had been happening when he had been pressing those keys. For each stop, each timbre or type of sound that the organ could make, namely blockflöte, trumpet, piccolo, there was a separate row of pipes, arranged in a line from long to short. Long pipes made low notes, short, high. The tops of the pipes defined a graph, not a straight line, but an upward-tending curve. The organist math teacher sat down with a few loose pipes, a pencil and paper, and helped Lawrence figure out why. When Lawrence understood, it was as if the math teacher had suddenly played the good part of Bach's Fantasia and Fugue in G minor on a pipe organ the size of the spiral nebula in Andromeda, the part where Uncle Johann dissects the architecture of the universe in one merciless, descending, ever-mutating chord, as if his foot is thrusting through skidding layers of garbage until it finally strikes bedrock. In particular, the final steps of the organist's explanation were like a falcon's dive through layer after layer of pretense and illusion, thrilling or sickening or confusing, depending on what you were. The heavens were riven open. Lawrence glimpsed choirs of angels ranking off into geometrical infinity. The pipes sprouted in parallel forms from a broad, flat box of compressed air. All of the pipes, for a given note, but belonging to different stops, lined up with each other along one axis. All of the pipes for a given stop, but tuned at different pitches, lined up with each other along the other perpendicular axis. Down there in the flat box of air, then, was a mechanism that got air to the right pipes at the right times. When a key or pedal was depressed, all of the pipes capable of sounding the corresponding note would speak, as long as their stops were pulled out. Mechanically, all of this was handled in a fashion that was perfectly clear, simple, and logical. Lawrence had supposed that the machine must be at least as complicated as the most intricate fugue that could be played on it. Now he had learned that a machine, simple in its design, could produce results of infinite complexity. Stops were rarely used alone. They tended to be piled on top of each other in combinations that were designed to take advantage of the available harmonics. More tasty mathematics here. Certain combinations in particular were used over and over again. Lots of blockflötes in varying lengths for the quiet offertory, for example. The organ included an ingenious mechanism called the preset, which enabled the organist to select a particular combination of stops he himself had chosen, instantly. He would punch a button and several stops would bolt out from the console, driven by pneumatic pressure, and in that instant the organ would become a different instrument with entirely new timbres. The next summer, both Lawrence and Alice, his mother, were colonized by a distant cousin, a stupendous badass of a virus. Lawrence escaped from it with an almost imperceptible tendency to drag one of his feet. Alice wound up in an iron lung. Later, unable to cough effectively, she got pneumonia and died. Lawrence's father, Godfrey, freely confessed that he was not equal to the burdens now laid on his shoulders. He resigned from his position at the small college in Virginia and moved with his son to a small house in Moorhead, Minnesota, next door to where Bunyan and Blanche had settled. Later, he got a job teaching at a nearby normal school. At this point, all of the responsible adults in Lawrence's life seemed to arrive at a tacit agreement that the best way to raise him, certainly the easiest, was to leave him alone. On the rare occasions when Lawrence requested adult intervention in his life, he was usually asking questions that no one could answer. At the age of 16, having found nothing in the local school system to challenge him, Lawrence Pritchard Waterhouse went off to college. He matriculated at Iowa State College, which, among other things, was the site of a naval ROTC installation in which he was forcibly enrolled. The Iowa State Naval ROTC had a band, and was delighted to hear that Lawrence had an interest in music. Since it was hard to drill on the deck of a dreadnought while playing a pipe organ, they issued him a glockenspiel and a couple of little dingers. When not marching back and forth on the floodplain of the Skunk River making loud dinging noises, Lawrence was